In this video, we'll learn how to paint our assets using images here inside of MARI. Alright, great. So I've got my Assassin Final archive open for you guys here, and I've just got the head geometry visible. Now, painting with images is a little bit different than we've looked at in previous videos. In previous videos, we've learned about MARI's brush engine. We've learned about how we can paint using color. But painting with images is something that's actually pretty common for a texture artist. It's something where we can get a really high level of detail really quickly. You can see here inside this particular texture, I've got all of the skin pore detail as well as some of the eye detail and some of the other nice things that are really available only in a photograph. This type of detail would take a tremendous amount longer to paint by hand. So MARI includes a tool and a procedure for painting with images. This is not done with the paintbrush tool. This is actually done with the Paint Through tool, this tool right here. Now you can access this tool by tapping on the U key on your keyboard. If I tap that U key, you can see here that I've selected that tool, but that's typically not the way I'll access it. I'll show you really quickly how we can access it another way. But first we need to get some images to paint with over inside of our image manager. I'm just going to jump over here inside an Explorer window, and let me just grab some head images. We'll grab those three, and then these three right here. And I'm just simply going to drag them into the image manager. Now this is one way to load up images and open these images inside of the image manager. We could also browse to them using this button right down here. But you can see those images are now inside of MARI and ready to use. So the cool thing about this is we can actually select any of these images, and you can see there is information about the image down below. We can see things like the height and width of the image. You can see things like the color space. These three images up here were already inside this archive, and I've neglected to include any other images. Now these were images that were required by either an environment light with these two images or a tiled procedural shader, or rather a tiled procedural layer. And so these three will be included in that archive. You'll have to manually load in the remainder of the images, just like I just did. Now the reason I didn't include these other images is because it can tend to make the archive even larger than it already is. So I like to strip this type of thing out before I archive my projects. So inside the image manager, we can double click on one of these images and view it here inside of MARI. We can zoom in and navigate around inside the image just like we're navigating in the canvas using the Alt right click to zoom and middle click to pan. We could actually come in here and actually make a selection just simply by clicking and dragging with our left mouse button. I'm actually going to just maybe select her nose and her mouth here. And we can actually crop in on this area. So if I were to come in here and just tap that crop button, you can see I created another image inside the image manager for just the nose and the mouth. Now I don't actually need that, so in order to get rid of an image from the image manager here, you just need to select it and then come over and just click this button here, and that'll close out the image. Alright, great. So just a little bit of ramp up. Let me jump over to my layers panel here, and I've got all of my skin textures that I projected using the Paint Through tool. I put that all on this image projection layer. So I went ahead and created a layer above that called Demo before I started this video, and if I show that layer, what you'll see is I filled that layer with a gray color. And I've done that just to hide everything that I did on that image projection layer. We'll wait for MARI there. Alright, there we go. So this should allow me to paint some of these textures fresh. Now there is some information above it here in the layer stack, and that is what you're seeing on the scalp, but that's okay. We won't worry about that. Now in order to paint with the Paint Through tool, we could actually be on a completely different tool and decide we want to use one of these images, and all we need to do is simply click on an image and drag it over to the canvas. Now, you'll notice here that something happened in your copy of MARI that may be something like this. It may look quite a bit more opaque, and you can see what we're looking at here is the image itself, very large. So by default, when you drag this in, it's going to drag in at its full resolution, which is entirely too large for my canvas right now. So we need to shrink this down and maybe position it so we can work with it. Now, when you've drug an image onto the canvas, you can hold the Shift key down and you can pan around, kind of move that image around. We can also hold the Control key and we can actually rotate that image. And we can combine the two keyboard shortcuts, Control and Shift, and shrink that image down or enlarge that image, whichever we need to do. Now, this is not actually scaling it up inside the paint buffer. This is not actually in the paint buffer yet. We will put some paint there here in just a moment, but typically what I'll do here is I'll try and line an image like this up as best as I can with the actual geometry. And if you're having problems seeing the geometry through the image, you can use the keyboard shortcut Shift- to decrease the opacity of the image and Shift+ to increase it. So I'm going to come over here and take that down a bit, kind of try and line some of these details up. Now, in my experience, these details almost never match up exactly, but we're going to try and get pretty close here. And we'll come in and enlarge just a bit. So some of the things I like to look at are the corners of the mouth and the nostrils, and then of course the eyes with the eye holes here. So that's pretty close. Now, when working with the Paint Through tool, keep in mind that this uses MARI's brush engine. And just like any of the other tools we've looked at, the paintbrush, the eraser, we have access to both the brush editor palette here, as well as all of the brushes inside of MARI's shelf. So we can hold the K key down and choose maybe this hard 100. And I'll just jump over to Properties and disable the pressure sensitive flow control here. That way we get a nice consistent stroke. And now we can come over and begin to paint. So I'll just come in and start to paint right into the paint buffer. Now you can see here that I'm getting a lot of that nice photographic detail, and it looks like it's painting right onto the mesh, but in reality we're painting this into the paint buffer. So I'm coming in, we'll just drop in a few more details here. Now I'm using a brush to apply this paint to the paint buffer right now, which is usually the way that I'll do this, but there are some options available to you up inside the Tool Properties toolbar. You can see we have our painting mode, which is going to function just like with the paintbrush that we looked at. We can come in and access all of those different painting modes here. We have a different mode option here. Right now by default it's set to Paint Through, but we could set this to Image Clone. I'm not going to do that for this particular video though, because most of the time when I use this tool I'm using it in Paint Through mode. There's a couple of other options here. We have the option to stamp the image down, which is going to take the entire image and just stamp that into the paint buffer, just like so. And then if you're using this tool for something different, maybe you have a tileable image, you can turn on this repeat function here, and that'll allow you to basically shrink down the image very, very small. And when you reach the edge of the image, it will allow you to repeat that. So see how I can come in here and begin to repeat that, just like so. All right, fantastic. I'm actually going to go ahead and clear that out because I've completely messed up exactly what I was doing here. In this particular example, we are just basically dropping in some face textures here. So I'll go ahead and sort of line those details up one more time. That looks pretty close, and we'll just come in and paint in some of these details really, really quickly. Now again, this is going into the paint buffer, and we learned in previous videos that there are things to consider, especially with a piece of geometry like this, when it comes to painting where the geometry is curving away from the camera. Remember, we learned about edge masking, and I do have that currently turned on. But I'm just going to come in and get that texture pretty close here. There we go. We'll start with something like that. And let's go ahead and bake that texture down. I'll go ahead and tap the B key here. We'll let MARI bake that in. All right, great. So another important thing to keep in mind is this image, we've modified it from its original form. It was much larger here in relation to the paint buffer. We can come in and reset the image at any time and send it back to its original very large state if we ever want to do that. So that is helpful when you're switching images. A lot of times you'll size an image to use it, and then you'll switch to a different image, and you'll need to reset the tool for that. So let me just tap the P key and switch over to my paint brush tool to get that image preview out of the way. And we can see here what I've done. I've basically baked in that high resolution detail into the mesh. Now you can see here that I do have some stretching going on. You can really start to see that right around in here, which is not uncommon. So again, remember that, well, we need to make sure we have our edge masking on. That's the problem right there. I thought I had that on when I started this video, and clearly I did not. So this is a really good example of what can happen when you don't use edge masking. You can get a lot of stretching like that. So again, this is the paint through tool. I would probably, if I was using this in my final textures, I would definitely want to go ahead and take that projection again. But in reality, when I'm doing something like a head like this, there's a lot of manipulation that goes on, especially since I'm not using her hair. I would come in and probably take a number of different orthographic projections using different photographs. For example, this guy right here, so I could get some of those nice details on her cheeks that are not necessarily clear in the other photograph. And when it comes to ears, I like to come in and take a close-up shot of the ear so I can get a lot of that detail in here as well. So if you'd like to work on this in between videos, feel free. There's a lot of work on something like a head that needs to go into using image projection to create realistic skin detail. Obviously, you'd take out things like the eyes and the eyelashes, and you'd probably want to line the eyelids up a little bit closer because, again, we have eye geometry 1, and 2, you probably don't want the actual eyelashes baked into your texture. But this is the paint through tool here inside of MARI. It's a tool that I use quite a bit, and I know as you're diving into MARI and getting up to speed with it, that you're going to love using this tool as well.